First trip to Moscow as U.S. Secretary of State for Rex Tillerson. There'll be no big bash at the Kremlin for a former boss of Exxon, once decorated by Vladimir Putin for his joint ventures with Russia. The frosty welcome was how it was anticipated ahead of time after last week's strikes against a Syrian airbase that allegedly served as the launch pad for chemical attacks that killed more than 80 civilians. Now, after a discreet start to his new career, Tillerson stepping into the light, just as foreign policy hawks seem to be flushing the isolationists out of the West Wing of the White House. Will this trip mark the end of the reset with Russia? And this just 86 days into the Trump presidency. Of course, there's the other side to consider. Vladimir Putin had gone to great pains to, for instance, bring Turkey and Iran to the same bargaining table over Syria. What role now for Russia and Syria? What reaction? We're going to be asking on the day that the defense ministry in Moscow announced the death of 2 army officers, a third seriously wounded in a mortar attack in Syria. How does the Kremlin see Trump and the West, and how does it manage public opinion at home in the wake of those airstrikes? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Rex Tillerson's visit to Moscow, and with us from the Russian capital, Andrei Kortunov, Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Thank you for being with us. From New York City, Michael Pregent, Adjunct Fellow at the Hudson Institute. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you very much.
From Istanbul, Borzu Dargahi, Middle East correspondent for BuzzFeed News, who's been to Syria on many an occasion. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
And here in the studio, Elena Servatas, Editor-in-Chief of Open World, a new news media website.
It's not a website because, as you know, all the people are reading news from social media now. So it's only Facebook, Twitter, and Russian social media. So welcome.
In Russian.
Exactly.
All right, Elena Servatas, many thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Let's begin with the latest. Just as Rex Tillerson was arriving in Moscow, a lot of the focus turning to this unnamed senior U.S. official who told the Associated Press news agency that Russia knew in advance of Syria's chemical weapons attack last Thursday. The official says a Russian-operated drone flew over a hospital in Syria as victims of the attack were rushing there to get treatment. Hours later, a Russian-made fighter jet bombing the hospital.
The official said that this is now the basis of U.S. understanding, that Russia must have known in advance and was even probably complicit in a follow-up attack on a hospital where people were fleeing to get treatment for their chemical wounds, which the United States sees as an attempt to cover up the chemical weapons attack.
Now, White House sources telling our own correspondent, Philip Crowther, that they cannot confirm whether or not a drone was used, sketchy on exactly what happened in the bombing of that hospital and whether or not it was indeed a cover-up, but for sure pointing the finger squarely at Moscow over the fact that, yes, sarin gas was used, and number two, that Moscow had to have known the Russians sharing that airbase with the Syrians. Borzu Dargahi, what more have you found out on your end on this?
I mean, in terms of the various facts that are out there, I think there's information campaigns by both sides, both the U.S. and the Russians, meant to get their narrative out there, meant to use information to pressure the other side over this issue. But, I mean, the facts that we do know is that the Syrian, Russian, Iranian alliance in waging this war against the rebels and occasionally against ISIS has, repeatedly targeted civilians, has, unless you're a total pro-Moscow shill, has undoubtedly used chemical weapons in the past, has targeted hospitals repeatedly. I just read a report that said that there's not a single hospital in rebel-held territories that was not bombed at least once in 2016. Not a single hospital. Every single hospital in rebel-held territories was struck by the Syrian-Russian alliance, hit by air. So, you know, I mean, this is the bigger story. You can get lost in all these details. There's going to be a lot of allegations. There's going to be a lot of sophisticated information operations on both sides, perhaps. But the bigger story is that, yes, there is a horrific war being waged in the name of fighting terrorism, mostly targeting Syrian civilians.
Yeah, let's hear of course, from Moscow, a different story being spun this Tuesday. The Russia's president speaking in the company of his Italian counterpart, warning of conspiracies, hinting they could be orchestrated by the opposition in Syria.
We have intelligence from various sources suggesting that similar provocations are being prepared for other regions of Syria, including in the southern suburbs of Damascus, where they're planning to plant chemicals and blame the Syrian government for using them. But we believe that any incidents of this nature should be thoroughly investigated. We are going to officially call on the relevant UN agency in The Hague to thoroughly investigate the chemical attack.
Andrei Kortunov, what's your take on what happened last week in that attack?
Well, if we assume that Mr. Putin is a rational politician, that he thinks in advance about his steps, my feeling is that a chemical attack, under the current circumstances at least, is the last thing that the Kremlin would like to see, because the situation on the ground was more or less fine for Bashar Assad and his forces. Russia got the upper hand in these negotiations in Astana, and I think that they knew that Secretary Tillerson would come to Moscow, and they knew that the use of chemical weapons would explode the whole agenda of the US-Russian relationship. So my question is why? You know, how can this use of chemical weapons be justified if we assume that Russians knew about the use of these weapons and they somehow endorsed Bashar Assad in this criminal affair? Plus, you know, let me also say that Putin takes, or at least he took, personal pride in the implementation of the US-Russian agreement on dealing with the chemical arsenal in Syria back in 2013. He mentioned it many times that, you know, we can work together, we can solve a problem. Russia is a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. So it is very difficult to imagine the reasons compelling enough to push the Kremlin in this direction.
We heard on the Sunday talk shows Rex Tillerson say that Moscow is either complicit or incompetent when it comes to controlling Damascus. What was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, you know, I do not exclude that Damascus was cheating on this issue, like on many other issues. The implementation of the 2013 agreement was controlled by the United Nations, not just by Russia only. But again, you know, if you look at the position of Bashar Assad today, is it so desperate that he has to use nuclear weapons when he knows that basically he does it not just to the United States or to the opposition, but to his major protector, Mr. Putin? I do not know the reaction of Putin to the use of chemical weapons, but if it turns out that it was the Syrian regime that used these weapons, I'm sure that Mr. Putin will never forget it and will never forgive.
Michael Pregin, you agree?
Well, I think if I was a Russian soldier and I was sharing a base with Syrians that were taking munitions out of a chemical storage facility and putting them on an aircraft, I'd be very concerned. I would stay on the other side of the base and hope not to pay attention to it. But it's hard for us to believe that at least the Russian commanders on the ground did not know that Assad was going to use chemical munitions. As far as the messaging goes, a lot of Syrians believe Assad used chemical weapons as a way to tell them, no one cares what I do,
and this is what I can get away with. Well, I'm glad the international community has paid attention, but it shouldn't just be a chemical strike that gets our attention. It should be anytime Russia uses white phosphorus or cluster bomb munitions on the civilian populace. Those are both illegal munitions, but once you have the tag of a chemical weapon, that gets everybody's attention. But these barrel bombs, white phosphorus, and other things that are being used against the civilian population should get everyone's attention as well.
But Andrei Kortunov makes a compelling argument there that this is absolutely not in Moscow's interest, this use of sarin gas. Have you thought about this, Michael Pregent?
Yeah, it's not in their interest, and it means that they may not have control over Assad, and it should give us leverage, meaning the international community in the United States, to tell Putin, listen, you can't control this guy. You shouldn't tie your position in Syria to Assad's survival. But what Syrians will also tell you, that it's not just removing Assad from position. You have to remove Assad's family from government. Because if you simply allow Assad to put a proxy in place, then these atrocities will continue, with one exception. Assad won't be held responsible for what he's directing as an outsider. So Russia should distance themselves from Assad. Another thing that we're trying to push here is we should ground Assad's air force, making Putin's air force the only air force in the sky supporting Iranian proxies on the ground. That way, if there is a hospital that's attacked, or there are chemical munitions or white phosphorus or other munitions being used on the civilian population, Russia will be solely to blame for that. And the international community can actually get sanctions like the G7 failed to do today and give the international community leverage over Putin and leverage over Russia's involvement in Syria.
All right, you're saying the international community should be grounding those forces. We'll get back to that point in a little bit. I first want to ask Elena Servitas, what's your reading of the way we talked about narratives and counter-narratives and the way the story's been spun? How has the story been told in Russia?
It's very interesting to go on from early beginning, because when our colleagues and Andrei Kortunov saying that it's not in Moscow interest, let's remember that the speaker of foreign minister in Russia, she said when she saw those children suffering on the ground, all these people, she said it was fake. It was like Hollywood. It was produced. It's not real footages that we saw. That this kind of reaction is already alarming us, because.
But that's not what Vladimir Putin is saying today. He's saying the attack was real. He just says it's not.
Yeah, but still, you know, when it's very. Important, the first reaction. Also, this story with bombing hospital, it was all the time the same thing. Russia bombing hospital to make, you know, their only aim to make chaos everywhere. It's not the first time. Our colleagues say that in 2016, all hospitals in Syria were bombed, and I was on the ground there on the Syrian border, and I saw people running from there, and everybody was telling me horrible stories. Families were dying in hospital, and the children were telling me how they saw their parents to be killed. You know, so it's this practice. It's unfortunately usual.
All right. So questions about the airstrike. The airstrike on that hospital and about the nerve gas attack. Question about the U.S. reaction, those 59 Tomahawk missiles fired from the Mediterranean. Washington says that it alerted Moscow before the attack on Sherat Air Base near Homs, and that it took out a fuel depot, Syrian Air Force planes, logistics. The governor of the province, though, downplaying the extent of the damage, claiming that planes were flying out shortly after. The Pentagon posting drone pictures after the strike. And the U.S. President, Donald Trump, tweeting on Saturday, the reason you don't generally hit runways is that they're easy and inexpensive to quickly fix. Michael Pregent, what do you think of that tweet? Was it mission accomplished for that missile attack by the U.S.?
No, we should have rubbled the airstrip regardless of how easy it is to be fixed. One of the reasons we didn't hit Russian troops or Russian air defense assets, again, the Russians have S-300s and 400s in Syria. We didn't hit hit the Russian equipment, and we also warned Russia. And what's that doing now is it's making Assad very nervous. He believes that somehow Russia and the U.S. coordinated this strike. It's also making Tehran very uneasy. They believe the United States and Russia coordinated this strike. So Putin looks bad to Assad and Iran because of this strike. But more importantly, Tehran and Assad are asking Putin, what are you doing in Syria? I thought your whole presence here was to keep the United States from hurting the Assad regime. So there's a lot of questioning going on right now and a lot of unease in Damascus and Tehran because of this strike.
Borzu Dargahi, your take on the U.S. strike?
I mean, it's hard to evaluate what it will signify in the long run. I mean, we still don't know. I don't think the Trump administration knows yet what its Syria policy is. It doesn't know what its Russia policy is. It seems to know that it is against Iran and you know, Iran's expansion and Iran's weapons programs and technological programs. But other than that, it's sort of improvising as it moves along. And so the big question is, did those airstrikes herald a marker of a shift in Syria policy or Russia policy, or were they just a one-off reaction to Trump seeing something on cable news that he didn't like?
All right, and we're seeing that later in the week there's going to be a three-way meeting between Russia, Syria, and Iran that'll be taking place. When we come back, we're going to look now at this meeting, this visit rather, by Rex Tillerson to Moscow, what it can or cannot accomplish, and what the policies from the two superpowers will be going forward. You're watching the France 24 debate.